The bullet tore through the wagon wheel just as Clara Bennett was reaching for her father's compass, and in that moment, sprawled in the Arizona dust with her heart hammering against her ribs, she realized that the stories about the lawless territories had not been exaggerations after all. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory stretched wild and unforgiving under a merciless sun. Clara pressed herself against the underside of the overturned wagon, her fingers still clutching the brass compass that had belonged to her father before consumption had taken him 6 months prior. The bandits who had attacked their small caravan had scattered into the hills after taking what they wanted, leaving behind 2 dead drivers and a young woman alone in a landscape that showed no mercy to the unprepared. She waited until the thunder of hoofbeats faded completely before crawling out from beneath the wreckage. The sun beat down on her shoulders through the thin fabric of her traveling dress, already coated with a fine layer of red dust. The other wagon in their party had made it over the ridge before the attack began, and she had no way of knowing if they would send help or simply count their blessings and continue toward Prescott. Clara stood on shaking legs and surveyed the damage. The wagon was beyond repair, listing badly on its shattered wheel. Supplies were scattered across the hard-packed earth, and the horses were long gone. She gathered what she could carry: a canteen that was mercifully still half full, some jerky wrapped in cloth, and her father's medical bag. He had been a physician in Philadelphia, and she had learned enough from watching him work to consider herself capable in an emergency, though nothing in those quiet years of education had prepared her for this. The sound of a single horse approaching made her spin around, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she did not possess. But the rider who appeared over the low rise was not one of the bandits. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, and he reined his horse to a stop about 20 feet away as if he understood that his sudden appearance might frighten her. "You hurt?" His voice carried across the distance, low and careful. Clara shook her head, not trusting her voice yet. The man dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical work, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this harsh landscape. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting into bright horizons. She guessed he was perhaps 26 or 27, not much older than her own 23 years. "Name is James Cordell," he said, approaching slowly. "I have land about 3 miles west of here. Heard the shooting?" He paused, taking in the scene with eyes that had clearly witnessed violence before. "I am sorry I did not get here sooner." "They took the horses," Clara managed to say, "and killed the drivers." James nodded, his jaw tightening. He walked past her to examine the bodies, and she turned away, not wanting to see them again. She heard him moving around, and when she finally looked back, he had covered both men with canvas from the wagon. "We need to get you out of this sun," he said, returning to where she stood. "Can you ride?" "I can ride." He helped her gather the scattered supplies worth saving and secured them to his horse. Then he swung up into the saddle and extended his hand down to her. Clara hesitated for only a moment before taking it. His palm was calloused and warm, and he pulled her up behind him with an ease that made the effort seem effortless. She settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware that she would need to hold on to him to keep her balance. "You can hold on," he said quietly, as if reading her hesitation. "I promise you are safe." Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. The horse started forward at an easy walk, and James guided them west, away from the broken wagon and its terrible memories. They rode in silence for a while, the landscape rolling past in shades of red and gold and brown. The mountains rose in the distance, purple against the bright sky. Despite the circumstances, Clara found herself noticing the beauty of this place, so different from the green humidity of Philadelphia. "You were heading to Prescott?" James asked after a time. "Yes. My uncle has a mercantile there. He offered me a position after my father died. I am sorry for your loss." Thank you." Clara paused, then added, "Thank you for stopping, for helping." "Could not very well ride past." He shifted slightly in the saddle. "This country can be hard on folks who do not know it. Those bandits have been troubling this area for weeks now. Sheriff has not been able to track them down. Do you live alone, out here?" The question came out before Clara could consider whether it was appropriate to ask. "I do. Have a ranch, though calling it that might be generous. It is more of a homestead right now. Got cattle, some horses, enough land to make something of it eventually." He paused. "My hands know how to work the land well enough. Been at it since I was 15, learning from my father before he passed. Came out here 5 years ago to build something of my own." There was something in his voice, a quiet pride mixed with weariness, that made Clara curious about this man who had appeared exactly when she needed help most. She wanted to ask more questions, but the homestead came into view before she could formulate them properly. It was modest but well-maintained, a solid cabin with a covered porch, a barn that looked newly built, and corrals that held several horses. A windmill turned slowly in the breeze, and Clara could see a vegetable garden laid out in neat rows near the house. Everything spoke of careful attention and hard work. James helped her down from the horse, and Clara was surprised to find her legs unsteady. The shock of the attack was catching up with her now that she was somewhere safe. He seemed to notice, because he kept one hand lightly on her elbow as he guided her toward the house. "You should sit down," he said. "I will get you some water. Real water from the well, not that stale canteen supply." The inside of the cabin was simple but clean. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. Clara could see 2 doors leading to what she assumed were a bedroom and perhaps a storage room. Everything was orderly, almost surprisingly so for a man living alone. James brought her a cup of water from a bucket near the door, and Clara drank gratefully. The water was cool and sweet, and she had not realized how thirsty she was until that moment. "I need to ride into town, report what happened," James said. "Sheriff will need to know about those drivers, and about you being here. Your uncle in Prescott should be notified too, so he does not worry." He paused, seeming uncertain for the first time. "You will be safe here. I can lock the doors, leave you my rifle." "How far is town?" "About an hour's ride to Copper Springs. It is not much, but it has a sheriff and a telegraph office." He was already moving toward the door, clearly anxious to take care of the necessary business. "There is food in the cupboard if you're hungry. I will be back before dark." Clara nodded, and then he was gone, his boots thudding across the porch and down the steps. She heard his horse leave at a gallop, and then the silence of the homestead settled around her. She sat for a long moment, simply breathing, letting the events of the day settle into something she could comprehend. Then, needing to do something with her hands, she stood and began to explore the cabin more thoroughly. It was clear that James Cordell was a man who valued order and cleanliness. The dishes were washed and stacked neatly. The floor was swept. Books lined a small shelf near the fireplace, and Clara found herself drawn to them. There were practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also poetry by Whitman and novels by Dickens. A man who read surprised her, though she was not entirely sure why. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon when Clara heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Her heart jumped into her throat. But then she recognized James's voice speaking to someone, and she relaxed slightly. She went to the door and saw him dismounting along with another man wearing a sheriff's badge. "Miss Bennett, this is Sheriff Tom Rawlings," James said as they approached the porch. "I told him what happened." The sheriff was an older man with gray in his beard and kind eyes that had nevertheless seen too much. He removed his hat as he stepped onto the porch. "Miss, I am awful sorry about what happened to you today. Those bandits have been a plague on this territory. We will do everything we can to track them down." "Thank you, Sheriff." "I sent a telegram to your uncle in Prescott," the sheriff continued. "He is going to arrange for a stage to come through Copper Springs in 3 days. If you are agreeable, James here has offered to let you stay at his place until then. Otherwise, there is a boarding house in town. though I will be honest with you, it is not particularly comfortable, and Mrs. Henderson, who runs it, is not particularly welcoming to strangers." Clara looked at James, who was studying the porch boards as if they were fascinating. A faint color had risen in his tanned cheeks. "I do not want to impose," she said carefully. "It is no imposition," James said, finally meeting her eyes. "You should not be alone after what you have been through, and you will be more comfortable here than in town." There was something earnest in his expression that made Clara believe him. "Then I accept?" "With gratitude." The sheriff nodded, satisfied. "I will send word if we catch those bandits. James, you take care now. Miss Bennett, I hope the rest of your journey is more peaceful." After the sheriff rode away, an awkward silence settled between Clara and James. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost impossibly vivid. James cleared his throat. "I should see to the animal," he said. "Make yourself at home. The bedroom is yours for as long as you are here. I will take the settee." "I cannot take your bed," Clara protested. "You can, and you will." His tone was firm but not unkind. "I have slept in worse places than a settee, Miss Bennett. Please, do not argue with me on this." He disappeared into the barn before she could protest further, and Clara found herself smiling despite everything. There was something comforting about James Cordell's straightforward manner, his clear sense of what was right and proper. She went back inside and explored the bedroom. It was as neat as the rest of the house, with a simple bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser, and a washstand with a basin and pitcher. A single window looked out toward the mountains. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and felt the exhaustion of the day wash over her, but she forced herself to stand, to wash her face and hands in the basin, to shake as much dust as possible from her dress. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found James in the kitchen area working on preparing a meal. He had changed into a clean shirt and his hair was damp, suggesting he had washed at the pump outside. "I hope you like beans and salt pork," he said without turning around. "It is not fancy, but it is filling." "Can I help?" "You can sit and rest. You have had a difficult day." But Clara moved to stand beside him anyway. "So have you. You rode out, found me, rode to town and back, and now you are cooking. Let me at least set the table." He glanced at her, and something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Plates are in that cupboard there, forks and knives in the drawer." They worked in companionable silence, and soon they were sitting across from each other at the small table. The food was simple but well prepared, and Clara ate more than she had expected to, given the circumstances. "This is good," she said. "Thank you." "My mother taught me to cook before she passed," James said. "She always said a man needed to be able to take care of himself, not rely on others for basic necessities." "She sounds like she was wise." "She was." He paused, his fork hovering over his plate. "She would have liked you. She always appreciated people who could keep their heads in a crisis. You did well today, Miss Bennett. A lot of folks would have fallen apart." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment. "Please, call me Clara, and I'm not sure I did anything particularly brave. I mostly just hid under a wagon." "You survived. That takes its own kind of courage." He met her eyes across the table, and Clara felt something shift in the air between them, something she could not quite name. After dinner, James insisted on washing the dishes while Clara sat near the fireplace. He had started a small fire, not because the night was particularly cold, but because he said the light was comforting. Clara found herself watching him move around the cabin, noting the economical efficiency of his movements, the way he seemed completely at ease in this space he had created for himself. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said after a while. "Of course." "Why did you come out here? To Arizona, I mean. You said you wanted to build something of your own, but there must be easier places to do that." James dried the last plate and put it away before answering. He came to sit in the other chair near the fireplace, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "I grew up in Texas, on my father's ranch. After he died, my older brother inherited everything. That is the way of things, and I do not begrudge him. But I wanted land of my own, a place where I could build something that would last. The Arizona Territory was opening up, offering homesteads to folks willing to work the land. So I came out here with everything I owned in a wagon and started from nothing. Do you ever regret it? Sometimes when the work is hard and I am alone with my thoughts. But mostly no. This is my land, my home. Everything here exists because I built it with my own hands. He looked at her, his expression serious. My hands know how to work the land. I can mend a fence, break a horse, deliver a calf, fix a roof. I can do just about anything that needs doing on a ranch, but I have to admit, I do not always know what to say or do around people anymore. Spend too much time alone, I suppose? Clara smiled gently. You have been nothing but kind and proper since the moment you found me. I think you know exactly what to do. He ducked his head slightly and Clara realized he was embarrassed. It was endearing, this tough rancher who could face down bandits and tame wild horses but did not know how to accept a simple compliment. Tell me about Philadelphia, he said, clearly wanting to change the subject. What was it like, living in a big city? So Clara told him about her life before, about her father's medical practice, and the patients who would come at all hours of the day and night. She told him about the streets crowded with people, the markets full of goods from around the world, the theaters and museums and libraries. She also told him about the soot and smoke, the poverty in the tenements, the way you could be surrounded by thousands of people and still feel utterly alone. After my father died, there was nothing keeping me there, she said. I had no other family and the debts from his illness consumed everything we had. When my uncle wrote offering me a position, it felt like a chance to start over, to build a new life the way you did. Do you think you will like it here, in the West? Clara considered the question carefully. I think it is beautiful in a way I did not expect. It is hard and wild, but there is something honest about it. Does that make sense? It does. James's eyes were warm in the firelight. It is honest. The land does not lie to you. If you work hard, you have a chance. If you do not, you fail. It is simple. They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily now that the initial awkwardness had passed. Clara found herself telling James things she had not shared with anyone, and he did the same, opening up about his struggles to establish the ranch, his hopes for the future, his occasional loneliness in this vast landscape. Finally, Clara's exhaustion caught up with her, and she had to stifle a yawn. I'm keeping you up, James said immediately, standing. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be easier, I promise. Clara stood as well, suddenly reluctant to end the evening. Thank you, James, for everything. I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not come along. I'm glad I was there. His voice was soft, and for a moment they stood there, just looking at each other. Then James took a step back as if catching himself. Sleep well, Clara. She retreated to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Through the thin walls, she could hear James moving around, banking the fire, settling onto the settee. She changed into her nightdress and slipped between the clean sheets, breathing in the scent of sun-dried cotton and something else. Something that she realized was uniquely James. Leather and horses and the desert wind. Despite the trauma of the day, Clara fell asleep quickly, lulled by the profound quiet of the homestead and the knowledge that she was safe. She woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, but then memory returned. She rose and dressed quickly, braiding her hair with practiced efficiency. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the cabin empty but could hear sounds from outside. Clara stepped onto the porch and saw James working in one of the corrals, training a young horse. He had a long lead rope attached to the horse's halter, and he was guiding the animal in circles around him, his voice low and steady, full of patience. Clara watched, fascinated by the dance between man and horse, the way James's body language communicated calm authority without force. He glanced up and saw her watching, and the horse immediately tested the boundary, pulling against the rope. James brought his attention smoothly back to the animal, and after a few more minutes he led the horse to the fence and secured the rope. Good morning, he called, walking toward the house. I hope the rooster did not wake you too early. I am used to early mornings here, Clara said. My father often had patients arrive at dawn. There is coffee on the stove, and I left out some bread and butter for breakfast. Help yourself, huh? Have you eaten? Not yet. I wanted to work with that colt while the morning was still cool. Then let me make us both some breakfast, properly, I mean. Do you have eggs? James looked surprised but pleased. In the coop behind the barn? But you are a guest, Clara. You do not need to cook. I want to. I need to do something useful, or I will go mad thinking about everything that happened yesterday. She met his eyes, willing him to understand. Please. He nodded slowly. All right. I will not argue with you. The coop is easy to find, and the hens are used to people. Clara found the chicken coop exactly where James had said, and the hens were indeed docile, barely protesting when she gathered half a dozen eggs in her skirt. Back in the cabin, she found flour and lard and set about making proper biscuits to go with the eggs. She was no expert cook, but her father's housekeeper had taught her the basics, and she found comfort in the familiar tasks. When James came in, drawn by the smells of cooking, he stopped in the doorway and just stared. What is wrong? Clara asked, suddenly worried she had overstepped. Nothing is wrong. It is just that it has been a long time since I came home to the smell of someone else's cooking. It is nice. He washed his hands in the basin and sat at the table. Smells better than nice, actually. Smells wonderful. Clara served the eggs and biscuits, and they ate together in the warm morning light. James complimented the food multiple times, and Clara found herself pleased by his appreciation in a way that seemed disproportionate to the simple meal. After breakfast, James said he needed to ride out to check on his cattle. You're welcome to come along if you want, he offered somewhat hesitantly, or you can stay here and rest, whatever you prefer. Clara considered. The idea of sitting alone in the cabin all day held no appeal, and she was curious to see more of James's land. I would like to come, if I would not be in the way. You would not be in the way? He looked genuinely happy at her answer. James saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare for Clara and his own sturdy gelding. They rode out across the grassland, heading toward the low hills where James said he had his cattle grazing. The morning was already growing warm, but the sky was clear and endless, and Clara felt some of the tension from the previous day finally beginning to ease. How much land do you have? She asked as they rode. 640 acres, a full section. Took me 3 years to prove up on it, to show I was improving the land and living on it. Now it is mine, legally and properly. There was pride in his voice, and Clara understood why. In a world where so many people owned nothing, James had carved out his own piece of earth through sheer determination. They found the cattle scattered across a wide valley, grazing peacefully. James counted them with practiced ease, checking for any signs of illness or injury. Clara watched him work, noting the confidence in his movements, the way he seemed completely at home on horseback in this wild country. They all look healthy, he said with satisfaction. I was worried about that calf over there, the smaller one, but she seems to be thriving now. They dismounted near a creek that ran through the valley, letting the horses drink. James produced a canteen and some strips of dried beef from his saddlebag, and they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, eating a simple lunch. Can I ask you something? James said after a while, his tone careful. Of course. What will you do in Prescott? Working for your uncle, I mean. What kind of work? He wants me to help run the mercantile, bookkeeping, managing inventory, dealing with customers. He says business has grown enough that he needs help he can trust, and family is the only people you can really trust out here. Clara paused. I am grateful for the opportunity, truly. But I have to admit, I'm not sure if shopkeeping is what I want to do with my life. What would you want to do? If you could choose anything? Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. I always enjoyed helping my father with his patients, not the surgery or the truly medical parts, but the caring for people, talking to them, helping them feel less afraid. I thought about becoming a nurse, but it never seemed like a real possibility. Why not? Women nurses are not exactly common, and the training is difficult to come by. And then my father got sick, and everything else became more important than what I wanted. James nodded slowly. I understand that. After my father died, I spent 2 years working my brother's ranch, doing what was expected, before I finally had the courage to strike out on my own. He looked at her, his expression serious. Maybe working for your uncle does not have to be forever. Maybe it is just the start, a way to get established, and then you can figure out what comes next. Maybe, Clara said, but she felt a surprising reluctance when she thought about leaving this place, about getting on that stage in 2 days and heading to Prescott. The feeling confused her. She barely knew James Cordell had been here less than a day. Yet something about this homestead, about the man who had built it, called to something deep inside her. They rode back to the homestead in the afternoon, and Clara helped James with the evening chores. He showed her how to feed the chickens properly, how to check the horses for any problems, how to make sure everything was secure for the night. She was a quick learner, and James seemed pleased by her interest and willingness to help. That evening, they fell into the same comfortable pattern as the night before. Dinner together, conversation by the fireplace, the easy companionship of two people who were surprisingly well matched. They talked about books they had read, places they hoped to see someday, their dreams for the future. James told her about his plans to expand the ranch, to build a bigger herd, maybe eventually to hire some help so the work was not quite so relentless. Clara told him about her father's stories of his own youth, his dreams of helping people, his quiet satisfaction in a life of service. He sounds like he was a good man, James said. He was. I miss him every day. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the grief still fresh. I keep thinking about things I want to tell him, questions I want to ask, and then I remember that I cannot. Without seeming to think about it, James reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, and the simple human contact was more comforting than any words could have been. I am sorry, he said quietly. Losing a parent is one of the hardest things in this world. I know that from experience. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the fire crackling softly. Then James seemed to realize what he had done and released her hand, a faint color rising in his cheeks. I apologize, he said. That was forward of me. No, it was kind, thank you. The moment stretched between them, full of something Clara could not quite name. Then James stood abruptly. I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow I thought we could ride into Copper Springs if you want. You could send another telegram to your uncle, and there is a general store where we could get you some supplies for the stage ride. That sounds good. Clara stood as well, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how tall James was, how his eyes in the firelight were the color of warm honey. Good night, Clara, he said softly. Good night, James. The next morning they rode into Copper Springs together. The town was small, just a main street with perhaps a dozen buildings, a saloon, a general store, a livery stable, the sheriff's office, a church, and a few other establishments. People on the street stared at Clara with open curiosity, and she was acutely aware of the whispers that followed them. James seemed to notice too, because his jaw tightened slightly, but he just helped her down from her horse and escorted her to the general store with quiet courtesy. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles, greeted James warmly. James Cordell, good to see you. And this must be the young lady who had all that trouble yesterday. Terrible business, just terrible. I am glad you are all right, miss. Thank you, Clara said. Miss Bennett needs some supplies for travel, James said. Whatever she wants, put it on my account. James, no, Clara protested. I have some money. I am sure you do, but I am offering, please. His voice was firm, and Clara recognized that same tone from when he had insisted she take his bedroom. She nodded, accepting with as much grace as she could muster. She selected practical items, a canteen, some jerky and hardtack, a blanket. But her eyes kept returning to a bolt of blue fabric on the shelf, a cotton print with tiny white flowers. It was pretty and impractical, and nothing she needed, but she found herself drawn to it anyway. James noticed her looking and said to the proprietor, "Add 3 yards of that blue fabric." "James, I know you do not need it, but you want it, and that is reason enough." He smiled at her, and Clara felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. After the general store, they stopped at the telegraph office where Clara sent a message to her uncle confirming that she was safe and would arrive on the stage as planned. Then James suggested they get lunch at the small restaurant next to the saloon. The restaurant was run by a Mexican woman named Senora Garcia, who greeted James like an old friend and fussed over Clara, bringing them generous plates of beans and rice and chicken with spices that made Clara's eyes water in the best way. "You are good for him," Senora Garcia said to Clara in a stage whisper that James could definitely hear. "He spends too much time alone, that one. Needs someone to cook for besides himself." "Senora Garcia, please," James said, embarrassed. But the older woman just laughed and waved a hand at him. "I speak the truth, and you know it. James Cordell." After lunch, as they walked back to their horses, Clara said, "She seems fond of you." She and her husband were some of the first people to welcome me when I came to Copper Springs. Whenever I come to town, I eat at their place. Her husband, Miguel, sometimes helps me when I need an extra hand with the cattle. James paused. They are good people. As they prepared to mount their horses, Sheriff Rawlings hailed them from across the street. He jogged over, his expression serious. "James, Miss Bennett, I wanted to let you know that we got word from the territorial marshal. They tracked down those bandits last night about 30 miles south of here. There was a gunfight, and 2 of them are dead. The other 3 are in custody and will stand trial." Clara felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had not fully realized she was carrying. "That is good news, Sheriff. Thank you for telling us." "Just wanted you to know you are safe now, miss. Those men will not be troubling anyone again." On the ride back to the homestead, Clara was quiet, processing the news. James seemed to sense that she needed space to think, and he did not push her to talk. But when they arrived home, and he was helping her down from her horse, Clara found herself saying, "I am glad they caught them, but I keep thinking about how easily I could have died yesterday, how close it was." "But you did not die. You survived." James's hands were still on her waist, and he did not seem in any hurry to let go. "You are here, and you are safe. Because of you." Clara looked up at him, at his sun-weathered face and serious eyes. "If you had not come along when you did—" "But I did come along. That is what matters." His voice was rough, and his hands tightened slightly on her waist. For a moment, Clara thought he might kiss her, and she realized with startling clarity that she wanted him to. But then James stepped back, releasing her, and the moment passed. "I should unsaddle the horses," he said, his voice carefully neutral. That evening, their last evening together before the stage came, felt weighted with things unsaid. They cooked dinner together, Clara making biscuits again while James fried steaks from a beef he had butchered the previous week. They ate and talked, but there was a thread of tension running beneath the conversation, an awareness that their time together was running out. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, James suddenly said, "I do not want you to go." Clara's breath caught. "What?" "Tomorrow the stage will come, and you will go to Prescott, and I will likely never see you again. And I know that is how it should be, that you have a life waiting for you there, but I cannot stop thinking about how wrong it feels." He turned to face her fully, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had not seen before. "I have only known you for 2 days, Clara. That is not long enough to feel this way about someone, but I cannot help it. My hands know how to work the land, how to build fences and break horses, and do 100 other practical things, but I do not know what to do when you are standing near me except want to be closer to you. I do not know how to say goodbye to you when everything in me is saying that you are supposed to stay." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "James, I know I have no right to ask you to change your plans. I know I'm just a rancher with a homestead and not much else to offer. But I am asking anyway, because I think maybe you feel this too, do you?" "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Yes, I feel it too. I thought I was going mad, feeling so much after such a short time. But when I think about getting on that stage tomorrow, about leaving here and never coming back, it feels wrong. It feels like I would be making a terrible mistake. James reached for her hand, and this time he did not let go. Then do not get on the stage. Stay here. Stay with me. James, I cannot just... People will talk. It would not be proper. Then marry me. Clara stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? Marry me, James repeated, his voice stronger now, more certain. I know it is fast. I know it is crazy. But I am 31 years old, Clara, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I wake up in the morning, and my first thought is about whether you are awake yet. I work with the horses, and I find myself thinking about how I want to show you things, teach you things, share this life with you. I look at this homestead that I built with my own hands, and for the first time I can see what it is missing. It is missing you. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but they were not sad tears. You are sure? You are absolutely sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Clara took a shaky breath. Then yes, I will marry you. The joy that broke across James's face was like the sun coming up. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Clara did not care. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth and strength and goodness of this man who had saved her life and was now offering her a future she had not dared to imagine. When James finally pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I will do everything I can to make you happy, he said. I promise you that. I know you will. Clara reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. I trust you, James, completely. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Clara did not want to pull away. She rose on her toes to meet him, and when their lips finally touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but it deepened quickly as years of loneliness on both sides dissolved in the warmth of connection. James's hands cupped her face with a tenderness that made Clara's heart ache, and she pressed closer, wanting to memorize everything about this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. We should do this properly, he said. We can ride into Copper Springs tomorrow, find the preacher. I will send a telegram to your uncle, explain the situation. What if he is angry with me for changing my plans? Then he is angry. But this is your life, Clara. You have to live it in the way that makes you happy. James smiled at her. Besides, if he is a reasonable man, he will understand that sometimes the best things happen when we are not planning for them. That night, Clara lay in James's bed, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would become Clara Cordell, the wife of a rancher in the Arizona Territory. It was not the life she had planned, but as she thought about James and his homestead and the future they could build together, she found that she had no regrets at all. The next morning, they rose early and rode to Copper Springs together. James was dressed in his best clothes, a clean shirt and vest that Clara had not seen him wear before, and he had taken extra care shaving. Clara wore her best dress, the one she had been saving for her arrival in Prescott, and she had pinned her hair up carefully. Reverend Matthews, the preacher at the small church, was surprised by their request but willing to perform the ceremony. You are certain about this? He asked, looking from James to Clara. Marriage is a sacred commitment not to be entered into lightly. We are certain, James and Clara said together, and the Reverend smiled. Very well then, give me a few minutes to prepare. While they waited, James sent a telegram to Clara's uncle. Your niece Clara safe and well. She has accepted my proposal of marriage. We will wed today in Copper Springs. She sends her love and hopes you will understand. James Cordell. They were married in the small church with only Reverend Matthews and his wife as witnesses. Clara had no ring, but James promised to get her one as soon as he could afford it. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Clara with a gentle reverence that made her eyes sting with tears. Afterwards, Senora Garcia insisted on hosting a celebration lunch at the restaurant, and somehow word had spread through the small town because people kept stopping by to offer congratulations. Sheriff Rawlings came and shook James's hand, telling Clara she had chosen a good man. The proprietor of the general store and his wife came bearing a gift of fine linen for the household. Even the gruff bartender from the saloon stuck his head in to wish them well. By the time they rode back to the homestead in the afternoon, Clara felt overwhelmed by the warmth of the community. "I did not expect everyone to be so welcoming," she told James. "You are one of them now," James said simply. "You belong here." That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, James was careful with Clara, attentive and gentle in a way that spoke of his deep respect for her. They came together with a tenderness that gradually built into passion, and afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Clara felt a peace she had not known since before her father's death. "Are you happy?" James whispered into the darkness. "I am so happy," Clara whispered back. "I did not know I could feel this way." James pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Neither did I." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both entirely new and strangely familiar. Clara learned the routines of ranch life, the early mornings tending to animals, the constant work of maintaining fences and buildings, the satisfaction of watching the cattle grow healthy and strong. James was a patient teacher, showing her how to ride better, how to read the signs of changing weather, how to handle a rifle for protection. But it was not all work. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. They read aloud to each other from James's collection of books. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds as thoroughly as they were learning each other's bodies. 2 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived from Clara's uncle. James brought it in from town, and Clara opened it with trembling hands, worried about what it might say. But the letter was kind. Her uncle wrote that, while he had been surprised by the sudden change in plans, he was glad Clara had found happiness. He wished them both well, and said that if they ever needed anything, they should not hesitate to ask. Clara cried as she read it, relief washing over her. "He is a good man, your uncle," James said, reading over her shoulder. "Yes, he is. I am lucky." Clara turned in her chair to face James. "I am lucky in so many ways." As summer deepened into fall, the homestead thrived. The cattle were healthy. The garden produced abundantly, and James managed to buy 3 more horses at a good price. But more than the material success, it was the happiness that seemed to fill every corner of the cabin that mattered most to Clara. She had found her place in this wild territory, had found her purpose not just in the work of the ranch, but in the partnership she had with James. They made decisions together, worked together, dreamed together. And every night they fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together. In October, Clara began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited another few weeks to be certain before telling James. She chose a quiet evening when the work was done and they were sitting on the porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "James, I have something to tell you," she said, her heart fluttering with nervousness and excitement. He turned to her immediately, his expression concerned. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I think I am with child." James stared at her for a long moment, and Clara watched a succession of emotions cross his face. Surprise, joy, awe, a touch of fear. Then a smile broke across his face, so bright and genuine that Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. "You are certain?" he asked. "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but I know my body, and I know the signs." James pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of something precious and fragile. "A child," he murmured against her hair. "Our child, Clara, I do not have words." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, even though she could see that he was. I am more than happy. I am. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright in the dim light. You have given me everything, Clara, a home that is truly a home, a purpose beyond just surviving, and now this, a family. I never dared to hope for so much. That winter was hard, as winters in the Arizona Territory could be, but Clara and James weathered it together. As her pregnancy progressed, James became increasingly protective, insisting that she not overwork herself, bringing her tea and making sure she was comfortable. Clara found his attentiveness endearing, even when it verged on excessive. The baby came in early spring, a difficult labor that lasted through the night and into the next day. James rode desperately to Copper Springs to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Johnson, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. With her guidance and support, Clara finally brought their son into the world as dawn was breaking. James, who had paced outside for hours, was allowed in after the baby was cleaned and wrapped. When Clara placed the tiny bundle in his arms, she watched her strong, capable husband's face crumple with emotion. He is perfect, James said, his voice choked. Clara, he is absolutely perfect. What should we name him? Clara asked, exhausted, but happier than she had ever been. I was thinking if you agree, we could name him Thomas after your father. He should carry that name, should know he came from a good man. Clara began to cry, overwhelmed by love for this thoughtful man who was now the father of her child. Thomas Cordell. Yes, that is perfect. Baby Thomas thrived, growing strong and healthy. He had his father's honey-colored eyes and his mother's dark hair, and both parents doted on him shamelessly. The homestead rang with his cries and coos, and Clara often found James simply standing over the cradle, watching their son sleep with an expression of wonder. As Thomas grew into a toddler, curious and energetic, Clara found herself thinking about her father's work, about healing and helping people. She mentioned to James that she had been reading his medical books, trying to learn more. You could do it, you know, James said one evening as they watched Thomas play with a carved wooden horse James had made. You could be a nurse, or even a midwife. Mrs. Johnson is getting older. She told me last time I saw her in town that she worries about what will happen to the women around here when she cannot work anymore. You would not mind if I spent time away from the homestead to help people? James looked at her with surprise. Clara, you are my partner, not my servant. If you want to help people, if you want to use your skills to make a difference, then of course you should do that. We will figure out how to make it work. So Clara began apprenticing with Mrs. Johnson, learning the art of midwifery and basic nursing care. She rode out with the older woman to attend births and sick calls, gradually taking on more responsibility as her skills grew. The women of the area came to trust her, and Clara found deep satisfaction in the work. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew tall and strong, helping his father around the ranch as soon as he was old enough. When he was 4, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a sweet-tempered child with James's smile. 2 years after that came another son, William, who was quiet and thoughtful like Clara. The ranch prospered under James's careful management. He hired 2 hands to help with the increased work, young men who lived in a bunkhouse James built near the barn. The original cabin was expanded, adding more rooms to accommodate the growing family. Clara's reputation as a skilled midwife spread throughout the territory. She delivered dozens of babies, saved countless lives with her careful nursing, and became a respected member of the community. James never complained about her absences, instead supporting her work and caring for the children whenever she was called away. One evening, when Thomas was 10 and helping his father mend a fence, the boy asked, "How did you and Mama meet?" James paused in his work, a smile playing at his lips as he remembered. "Your mother was in trouble, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time to help her. We only knew each other for 2 days before we got married." Thomas's eyes went wide. 2 days? But you and Mama are so... You are perfect together. How did you know after just 2 days? Sometimes you just know, James said, returning to the fence. When you meet the right person, something inside you recognizes them. It is like coming home to a place you have never been before." "That is strange," Thomas said, but he was clearly thinking about it. "It is strange," James agreed, "but it is also wonderful. Your mother changed my life completely. Before her, I had this land, this cabin, and nothing else. I was alone, and I did not even realize how lonely I was until she was standing in my kitchen, making biscuits and filling the house with life. My hands have always known how to work the land, how to fix things and build things, but they did not know what to do when your mother was near, did not know how to hold someone gently or how to comfort or how to show love. She taught me all of that." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "I hope I find someone like that someday. Someone like Mama." "I hope so too, son. You deserve to be as happy as I am." That night, after the children were asleep, Clara found James sitting on the porch, looking out at the land that had been his alone for so long but was now theirs together. "You are quiet tonight," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "I was just thinking about how different my life would be if I had not decided to ride out that particular day in that particular direction. If I had been an hour earlier or later, I would have missed you. We would never have met." Clara reached over and took his hand. "But you did ride out. You did find me. That is what matters. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me so quickly? Staying here instead of going to Prescott? Never. Not once." Clara squeezed his hand. "This life, our life, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me a home, James, not just a place to live, but a real home and children I adore and work that fulfills me and a partner who respects and supports me in everything I do. How could I possibly regret any of that?" James lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, Clara Cordell. More now than even on the day I married you, and I did not think that was possible." "I love you too," Clara said softly. "You and the life we built together, all of it." They sat together in the comfortable silence of long-married couples, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast desert sky. Inside the cabin, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the ranch that James had built with his own hands stood solid and thriving, and between them flowed the deep, abiding love that had begun with a chance encounter on a dusty Arizona road and had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, dedicated to the land and the work of ranching. Sarah proved to have a gift for music, somehow teaching herself to play the piano when James managed to buy one and have it shipped from San Francisco. William was fascinated by books and learning, already talking about becoming a teacher or maybe even a lawyer. Clara watched her children grow and felt pride swell in her chest. But more than that, she felt grateful. Grateful for the twist of fate that had brought her to this place, for the bandits who had attacked her wagon, for James's decision to ride out that day. All of it had led her here, to this life that she loved with her whole heart. When Clara was 45 and James was 53, they became grandparents for the first time. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from the next county over, a spirited young woman named Elizabeth who reminded Clara of herself. Their first child, a boy they named James after his grandfather, was born on a crisp autumn morning. James Cordell Sr. held his grandson for the first time and wept openly, unashamed of the emotion. "I never thought I would have this," he said to Clara. "A son, grandchildren, a legacy. I thought I would just work this land alone until I died, but you gave me all of this." "We gave it to each other," Clara corrected gently. As they moved into their later years, Clara and James gradually handed over more of the ranch work to Thomas and the hired hands. They spent their days more quietly now, tending the garden, reading, spending time with their grandchildren, but the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, becoming something richer and more complex with each passing year. One evening when Clara was 52 and James was 60, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The homestead had grown considerably since those early days. The original cabin was now part of a larger house. The barn had been rebuilt twice, bigger each time. Fences stretched across the property, and cattle dotted the hills. Children and grandchildren filled the space that had once been so empty and quiet. "Do you remember that first night?" James asked suddenly, "when you were here, sleeping in my bed, and I was on the settee wondering how my life had changed so completely in a single day?" "I remember," Clara said with a smile. "I remember lying there listening to you move around, feeling safer than I had felt since my father died. I remember thinking that there was something special about you, even though I barely knew you." "My hands knew how to work the land," James said, echoing the words he had spoken all those years ago. "But they did not know what to do when you were standing near. Do you know what they know now?" "What?" "Everything. They know how to hold you when you are sad. They know how to soothe a feverish child. They know how to help bring new life into the world when you are attending a birth. They know how to comfort and protect and cherish. You taught them all of that." "Clara, you taught me all of that." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "And you taught me that home is not a place. It is a person. It is you, James. It has always been you." He pulled her close, and they sat wrapped in each other's arms as the sun set over the land they had worked together for more than 30 years. Their children and grandchildren were nearby, filling the evening with laughter and life. The ranch that James had started alone was now a thriving family enterprise that would continue for generations. Neither of them could have predicted this life when Clara had climbed onto the back of James's horse that long ago day, desperate and alone. Neither could have imagined the depth of love they would find, the family they would build, the legacy they would leave. But as James held Clara and watched the stars emerge, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for that twist of fate, for the bandits who had attacked Clara's wagon in just the right place at just the right time, for his decision to ride out when he did. Everything had conspired to bring them together, and he would be grateful for that gift for the rest of his days. Clara, nestled in her husband's arms, felt the same gratitude. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been traveling west to an uncertain future. She thought about how close she had come to dying in the desert, and how James had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known to pray. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "I am thinking about how lucky we are, about how everything had to happen exactly the way it did, or we never would have found each other." "Not luck," James said firmly. "Fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it. You were meant to be mine, Clara, and I was meant to be yours. Nothing else makes sense." As full dark settled over the Arizona territory, Clara and James rose and went inside, hand in hand, to join their family for the evening meal. The table was crowded with children and grandchildren, loud with conversation and laughter. Clara looked around at all the faces she loved, at the life they had built from nothing but determination and love, and she felt her heart swell with contentment. After dinner, when the children were helping clean up, James pulled Clara aside. "Dance with me," he said. "There is no music. We do not need music. We never have." So they danced in the corner of their living room, swaying gently to a rhythm only they could hear. Around them, their family carried on with evening tasks, but Clara and James were lost in their own world, as they had been since that very first evening when James had confessed his feelings and Clara had agreed to stay. "I would do it all again," James murmured into her hair. "Every hard year, every struggle, every moment of worry, I would do it all exactly the same way because it led me to you." "And I would make the same choice every time," Clara replied. "To stay, to marry you, to build this life. It was the best decision I ever made." They continued to sway together, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful in the harsh desert landscape. Their love had withstood everything life had thrown at them, and it would continue to sustain them through whatever years remained. As the evening wore on and the grandchildren were tucked into their beds, Clara and James finally retreated to their own room. They moved with the familiar ease of long habit, preparing for bed in companionable silence. When they finally settled under the quilts, James pulled Clara close, tucking her against his side where she fit perfectly. "Good night, my love," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good night," Clara replied, her hand resting over his heart, feeling the steady beat that had become as familiar as her own. They drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the quiet sounds of their homestead. The wind rustling through the cottonwoods, a horse nickering softly in the barn, the creak of the house settling. All of it was home. All of it was theirs, built on the foundation of a love that had begun in an instant and had grown deeper and stronger with each passing day. Years later, when Clara and James were both in their 70s, they still lived on the ranch, though it was run entirely by their children and grandchildren now. They spent their days much as they always had together, talking and reading and simply enjoying each other's company. Their love had become legendary in the area, a story that people told as an example of what true partnership could be. Thomas, now a grandfather himself, sometimes asked his parents to tell the story of how they met. And Clara and James would sit side by side holding hands and recount the tale of a wagon attack, a chance rescue, and a decision to marry after knowing each other for only 2 days. "It sounds crazy when you tell it like that," Sarah would say, shaking her head. It was crazy, Clara admitted with a smile. But it was also right. Sometimes the craziest decisions are the right ones. "Your mother took a chance on a rough rancher who barely knew how to talk to people," James added. "And I took a chance on a city woman who had never ridden a horse properly or gathered an egg from a chicken coop. We were an unlikely pair, but we fit together perfectly." William, who had indeed become a lawyer and practiced in Prescott, always said, "It is my favorite love story. The fact that it is about my parents makes it even better." One crisp October evening, when the air held the promise of winter and the sky was impossibly clear, Clara and James sat on their porch wrapped in blankets. They were both feeling their age now, moving more slowly, tiring more easily. But their love had not diminished. If anything, it had become even more precious, knowing that their time together could not last forever. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Clara asked suddenly. "The night you asked me to stay?" "I said a lot of things that night. You said your hands knew how to work the land but not what to do when I was standing near. You said you wanted to be closer to me. You said I was supposed to stay." Clara turned to look at him, at his weathered face and gentle eyes. "You were right about all of it." James squeezed her hand. "Best thing I ever did was ride out that day. Best thing I ever said was asking you to marry me. Best thing I ever did was say yes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could see their grandchildren playing near the barn, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Smoke rose from the chimney of the house where Thomas and Elizabeth lived with their family. Everything was peaceful and settled and good. "If I could go back," James said quietly, "and tell that lonely man working this land by himself what was coming, what his life would become, I do not think he would believe me. He could not have imagined this much happiness." "I was so scared," Clara remembered, "getting on that stage in Philadelphia, leaving everything I knew behind. I thought I was just going to work in my uncle's store, live a quiet life, maybe never marry. I never imagined any of this." "I am glad you were scared. I am glad you got on that stage. I am glad those bandits attacked your wagon, even though I hate that you had to go through that fear." James turned to face her fully. "I am glad for every single thing that brought you to me." Clara leaned over and kissed him, a gentle press of lips that held decades of love and trust and partnership. "I am glad too, for all of it." As the stars began to emerge, Clara and James finally went inside, moving slowly but still hand in hand. They had been holding hands for more than 40 years now, and neither could imagine a time when they would not reach for the other first. In their bedroom, James helped Clara with her buttons, a nightly ritual that had evolved as they aged. She helped him with his boots, as she had done since the beginning. They settled into bed together, fitting into the familiar curves and hollows of each other's bodies. "I love you, Clara Cordell," James said, as he had said nearly every night for over 40 years. "I love you, James Cordell," Clara replied, as she had replied every time. They fell asleep together, dreamless and peaceful, surrounded by the life they had built and the family they had created. James passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 79. He went to bed one night, kissed Clara good night as he always did, and simply did not wake up. Clara, lying beside him, knew the moment his heart stopped beating. She lay there for a long time, holding his hand, saying her goodbyes to the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. James had been respected and loved, known for his fairness, his hard work, and his obvious devotion to his family. But more than anything, people remembered him as the man who had loved Clara Cordell with a steadiness and depth that inspired everyone who knew them. Clara grieved deeply, but not bitterly. She had been blessed with over 40 years with James, had built a beautiful life with him, had loved and been loved completely. She missed him terribly, ached for his presence, but she did not regret a single moment of their time together. She lived for another 3 years, staying on the ranch, helping with the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, sharing stories about James and keeping his memory alive. She continued her work as a midwife until she was physically unable to do so anymore, bringing dozens more babies into the world, each one a gift. On a spring morning, with wildflowers blooming across the hills and the sky bright and blue, Clara passed away in her sleep, lying in the bed she had shared with James for so many years. Her children found her with a peaceful expression on her face, and they knew that she had gone to join the man she had loved more than life itself. They buried Clara beside James on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, "Clara Bennett Cordell, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, healer, she knew how to love with her whole heart." The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and eventually his sons after him. The Cordell name became synonymous with good ranching and fair dealing in the Arizona Territory, and later the state of Arizona. But more than their business success, the family was known for the story of James and Clara, the cowboy and the city woman who had met by chance and loved by choice. The story was passed down through generations, told to children and grandchildren as an example of what true love could be. How James had found Clara in the desert, how they had married after only 2 days, how they had built a life and a legacy together, how his hands had learned not just to work the land, but to hold and cherish and protect, how her heart had learned to trust and love and build a home in the wild desert. The homestead stood for over 100 years, eventually becoming a historical landmark. Tourists would visit and learn about the Cordell family, about the ranching traditions of the Old West. But the rangers who gave tours always made sure to tell the love story, because that was what people remembered most. Not the acreage or the cattle numbers or the business success, but the profound and lasting love between James and Clara Cordell. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew across the hills and the sun set over the land that James had worked with his own hands, some said you could almost feel them there. The cowboy and his bride still walking the property together, still holding hands, still as in love as they had been on that first evening when he confessed that his hands knew how to work the land, but not what to do when she was standing near. Their love had transformed them both, had created a family and a legacy that lasted far beyond their years on earth. It stood as proof that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances, from following your heart even when logic says it is too soon or too risky. It showed that home is not about where you are but who you are with, and that true partnership can weather any storm and overcome any obstacle. The story of James and Clara Cordell became more than just family history. It became legend, a tale of love in the Wild West that inspired countless others to believe in the possibility of finding their own great love. And though they were long gone, their spirit remained in the land they had loved, in the family they had built, and in the hearts of everyone who heard their story and believed in the power of love to transform everything it touched.